Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Dean, and I'm here with Ping Turner and Leslie Phillips, who are the program coordinators for the Brain Residency Program. Our plan today is that Ping and Leslie are going to be moderating the chat and selecting questions and answering them as people go. And I'm going to give a talk about some of the research that we've been doing in the Google Brain team, some of the things that we've been doing to sort of push the frontiers of artificial intelligence, and also talk about the Brain Residency Program and how that works. And we're going to be discussing at the end how to apply for next year's program and sort of the mechanics of that. And then at the end, I'll bring in a couple of current brain residents to discuss their experience and we'll collectively answer any questions that Ping and Leslie think should be answered live. So here we go. I'm very excited about this.
And there's going to be a lot of URL links in Jeff Dean's presentation, and you can find them in the video description box.
And we encourage you to post questions throughout the presentation. Ping and I will be moderating and answer as many as we can.
Okay, here we go.
Thanks.
All right, so first, the thing about the Google Brain team is that our mission is basically to push the boundaries of artificial intelligence, to make machines intelligent, and then to figure out how to use that research in constructive ways to basically improve people's lives, build better, smarter, more intelligent products, develop new and interesting directions that are now possible given that machines can do things more intelligently that weren't possible before. And we bring together a really good mix of sort of computer systems builders, people with lots of machine learning research experience, and collectively we kind of work on difficult problems. And we sort of manifest our work in many different ways. So one is we conduct long-term research. We've published a large number of papers in sort of different machine learning conferences and other kinds of conferences. We've built an open source systems that have helped support our research so that we can also help the rest of the open research community push the boundaries of machine learning and artificial intelligence. We've been doing a lot of collaboration with others at Google and Alphabet, other product teams and other research teams to get our work in the hands of many different users. And we've been training new researchers. We take on a very large number of interns every summer in our group. And this year we've started a thing called the Google Brain Residency Program that we're about 2.5 months into. And we're starting the application process for next year's residents. And so I'll tell you more about that. So over the past decade or decade and a half, we've actually got a pretty good handle on large-scale computer systems to store and manipulate data. Basically, storing data in large data centers and running large-scale computations over them is now sort of a pretty well-understood art. And what we really now care about is not just being able to move bits from one place to the other, but building systems that can really get to a much higher level of understanding, things that you would consider as kind of human level understanding. So if I showed you as a human this image, you would have no trouble describing that image in a sentence or two. You could say, oh, what a cute little girl. She's holding a pink teddy bear and her bottle, and she's sitting in a chair. And we really want computer systems to be intelligent in the same way that humans are. We want them to be able to understand perceptual data like images and photographs at the same deep level that humans have no trouble doing. Similarly, we care deeply about understanding text. Text is something that sort of only humans of all the species out there really deal with. And it's one of the reasons we're incredibly powerful and able to communicate really well is we have this language for shared understanding. And so we want computers to really be able to understand text at the same deep level that humans can. So if I showed you this query, car parts for sale, if you just naively looked at how often different words occur in the two documents, you might think document 1 is a great match for that query. But in truth, a human would have no trouble saying, well, document 2 is clearly much more relevant because it's talking about transmissions and pickup truck parts and automobile parts, and I know that's related to car parts and selling them. And so we want deeper understanding of textual data as well. And I think one of the things that is happening is as computers become more capable, the things we expect from them become more advanced, right? So these are the kinds of queries that people want to be able to ask of machines. And some of these we can do today with pretty advanced techniques. Some of them are just kind of a bit beyond the state of the art in terms of what we can do, but they're aspirational in that we want to be able to build systems to handle these kinds of questions. So one of the things that we've been doing in our group is using deep neural networks for solving a lot of these kinds of problems. So many of you are probably already familiar with how deep neural networks work, but I'm going to give you a very brief introduction. And so neural nets have actually been around for quite some time. And one of the things that you can think of them as is very powerful ways of approximating very complicated functions. So not like y equals x squared, but like a function where you put in pixels and you get out a 1,000-dimensional vector that predicts which of 1,000 different kinds of objects is in that image, just from the raw pixels. And one of the ways that they're able to do this is through hierarchical building of interesting features. So if you think about a neural net, here's a model, a very simple kind of model you might use to solve a problem where you want to say, does that image contain a cat or a dog? And so the basic way you're going to use a neural net is you're going to feed in the raw pixels of that image, and then it's going to sort of progress upwards through this model and activate some of the feature detectors in these layers, and each of the layers kind of builds on the layers below it and activates neurons. These are sort of software emulated neurons that are very loose interpretations of how we believe real neurons work. And then finally, the model can use the high-level features that have been computed by this model to try to make a prediction of whether that contains a cat or a dog. And there's lots of different settings for machine learning, but one of them is what's called supervised learning, where you have a large corpus of example data where you have the image as input and you have labels that a human is assigned and says, that's a cat, that's a dog, that's a dog, that's a cat. And for a particular image, we're supposed to say this is a dog, and maybe we got this wrong, so we said that's a cat. And so one of the ways that these machines can learn is through supervised learning, where you say, oh no, actually, I need to correct your mistakes here. This should actually say dog. So I'm going to make little adjustments through mathematical formula, essentially using the chain rule and backpropagation, which is a technique for correcting the errors of a model, to make little adjustments throughout the model so that the next time I see this image or an image like it, I'm more likely to say dog. And that's one of the very basic techniques that we use to learn things. We can use large collections of labeled examples. We can use large amounts of computational power to solve difficult problems. And I'll show you much more complicated examples as the talk progresses. So one of the things that's been really nice about these kinds of approaches is they're very applicable to lots of different kinds of problems. In this graph, you can see how widespread our use of deep learning has become at Google across lots of different kinds of product areas. So this is a plot over time of the number of different sort of source code directories at Google that contain configuration files for our machine learning training systems. And you can see there's been essentially exponential growth in the use of these techniques. And part of that is because we've been working on building software tools that make using these kinds of approaches easier. And so TensorFlow is kind of the second generation of the system. There you see the shirt. This is a system that we built that allows us to perform the research we want to perform, but is also quite good for deploying real production systems based on our research. And we actually open sourced this last November. And it was a joint effort of a bunch of people in our team. You can see how many people are involved on just one of the papers that describes the core underlying system. But it's been pretty well received in the open source community as well. So you can see one measure of kind of how much interest there is in a particular project on GitHub is how many people have started or forked the project. And so TensorFlow, in the first 72 hours, we had 50,000 people install it, and we've had about 500,000 people install it since November 2015. It was actually the most forked new repository on GitHub in 2015, even though we only launched it in November. We're pretty proud of that. So it's been really nice to see the external community also pick up using TensorFlow and trying lots of different things. Just the other day, there was a a Japanese cucumber farmer who used TensorFlow and an Arduino machine to actually sort different varieties of cucumbers from his cucumber farm. So machine learning is really impacting not just sort of traditional computing things, but lots of different things around the world. And one of the really important properties of neural nets is that the results tend to get better if you can throw more data at the problem and use bigger models to train on those larger data sets. And obviously this requires a lot more computation. And also we're doing a lot of work on finding better algorithms to train these kinds of models more quickly and use different kinds of insights into what kinds of models are more easily trained and which kinds of models are sort of more difficult to train on different kinds of problems. So one of the things we really emphasize in our group is the ability to turn around research experiments quickly. As a machine learning researcher, one of the things you really want is to get your experiment time down low enough that you can be incredibly productive by trying something out, getting an answer perhaps in a few hours or a day, and that allows you to then figure out what the next set of experiments are that you'd like to run. And so we actually emphasize in our group using large amounts of computation to reduce the cycle time for machine learning experiments. If you have experiments that are going to take a month or several months to run, you're essentially not going to run those experiments. Or if you do, by the time they complete, you've kind of forgotten why you started them in the first place. And so one of the benefits we have at Google is we can actually take the large data centers we've built up over the years to serve our products. We can also use the computational resources in those data centers to essentially train large models quickly. And so just to illustrate how much benefit you can get from this, here's an example where we're training an image model, and this shows you how many hours of training have been performed on 1 GPU, 10 GPUs, or 50 GPUs, and what the accuracy of the model is. So higher is better here. And you can see that if you're able to use 50 GPUs to train this particular model, you get your answer to the same level of accuracy about 30 times as fast. So it's not 50 times as fast, but it's still a really good benefit because that means your experiment that would have taken a month now takes only a day. Another thing we think is really important, and one of the reasons we built TensorFlow, is that we want to be able to run these kinds of models on not just data centers, but all kinds of different sort of computational environments. And so we've built TensorFlow to run on mobile phones, single machines with CPUs or maybe a GPU card or a few GPU cards, on large distributed systems, and also on custom machine learning hardware. So Google has actually built this card that you see in the bottom right that is a custom processing unit for running the kinds of models that we actually are deploying very quickly, sort of much faster than a GPU or a CPU can run them. And other hardware manufacturers are starting to build interesting kinds of custom hardware for neural net models, simply because these models are very, very good at different kinds of perceptual tasks and have been shown to be able to do really interesting things. Okay, so what are some ways that deep learning is really having a big impact at Google? So I'm going to just kind of walk you through a few of the product things that we've done, and then I'll walk you through some of the research work that we're doing, and without any particular product in mind. So one of the first areas that we worked with our speech recognition team in is to deploy deep neural nets in the speech recognition system for Google. So this is the system that is active when you're talking to your phone. You say Palo Alto restaurants, and it's supposed to just understand what you said and know that so then you don't have to type anything, which is very convenient on mobile devices. And by deploying deep neural nets in the speech recognition system, we're actually able to reduce the word error rate very significantly, more than 30%, which is the equivalent of sort of several decades of progress in just a year in the speech recognition field. And so that's been really, really great. Another area that's been sort of very dramatically transformed by the use of neural nets is image recognition and various kinds of computer vision problems. And so this is a paper that some of our research colleagues have published a couple of years ago about a model called Inception, which is actually quite accurate at doing these sorts of things. There's been a lot of progress in this general area of better and better computer vision models. And so you see the progress over the past few years. Before people were using neural nets for the ImageNet competition, the error rate in top 5, so lower is better, was hovering around 26, 27% for the last few years before this. And then in 2012, Alex Kruszewski, Ilya Sutskever, and Geoffrey Hinton, who eventually ended up at Google, developed a model that dramatically dropped the error rate. So this is AlexNet to 16.4%. And you see this progression over time has been quite dramatic. Now we're down around 3.5% error rate, which is actually better than human performance. Andrei Karpathy is a graduate student at Stanford, and he decided he would test himself in a proper machine learning setup to see what the error rate was for humans. And so he trained himself on a set of test images for quite a while, 100 hours of training where he sort of look at an image and say, okay, that's a border collie. That's a ping pong ball. And some of these categories are quite fine-grained and pretty difficult for humans. And so he actually, with a proper training process, and then he would look at the test images that he'd never seen before and try to give the correct label to them. He actually got 5.1% error. And a lab mate of his that he couldn't convince to spend 100 hours on it, but only spent 10 hours, got like 12% error. So you can see this is a pretty difficult problem, and we're already sort of better than humans at this particular visual task. And that's important because in real products, we can actually use the ability that computers now have to understand what is in an image to do useful things for users. So Google Photos is a product that allows people to upload their photos, and you can then search your photos by essentially just typing queries, and we understand the contents of the photos that you've uploaded and can help you find your pictures of cats, or can group your photos by your birthday party photos or pictures of mountains and that kind of thing. Another area we're really excited about is the use of machine learning for healthcare. And we've been doing a little bit of work in the medical imaging domain, in particular using these kinds of computer vision models for a problem of detecting diabetic retinopathy in retinal images. So if you go to the eye doctor, the eye doctor will take a picture of the back of your eye and will then want to interpret the little spots you see there. Is that is that just fine, or is that early signs of a disease called diabetic retinopathy, which can lead to blindness? And it turns out that this is a very difficult task for doctors. They generally don't agree that well on whether this should be a 2 or a 3. In fact, they only agree about 60% of the time if you ask 2 different ophthalmologists to grade the image on their rating of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And so we now have a computer model that is actually considerably better than a whole bunch of ophthalmologists looking at the photo of the retinal image together. And we're pretty excited about this and other kinds of healthcare work. Okay, so let me switch gears a bit and tell you a bit about some of the recent research projects that we've been doing in our group, and what some of them, some of the details behind them, and I'll give you pointers to papers where appropriate. So one of the things we care about is being able to understand sequential data. And so Ilya Sutskever, Oriol Vinyals, and Kwok Lee in our group came up with a model called a sequence-to-sequence model, which is essentially taking an input sequence, and I'll show you examples of what those sequences might be, and then using that sequence to then predict a target sequence. Essentially, given the input sequence, you want to predict a probability distribution over likely plausible target sequences. And one use of this is for language translation. You can view sentences as one input sequence, one word at a time in French, and then you hit a special end of French token, and then you want the model to be trained to then spit out the corresponding English token. And with enough training data and a powerful enough model, you can essentially learn a complete machine translation system from scratch that's actually state-of-the-art quality without ever telling the system how to translate from one language to another. It just sort of learns to do this from observing patterns that it sees in the input and output training data. And so this is quite a powerful model for translation. And so, if you look at the training process, we have this French input sentence, which is sort of think about as an encoder is trying to encode some state, and then given that state, we want to then decode from that state into the corresponding English sentence. And so here you see decoding one word at a time, we're going to kind of be able to decode that. And then because this is a probabilistic model over plausible sentences, at inference time, you want to do a little bit of a beam search where you keep a bunch of plausible candidates in mind and then try to find out which one is the most probable given a little bit of exploration of this space. And so that's pretty exciting. It's actually getting very good results, and it's been quite useful. This has actually been deployed in the context of our Gmail system, where we can actually use as the input sequence a message that an email message that someone has received, and as the output sequences, we try to predict short replies that might make sense in the context of that input message, and that's been pretty useful. Most of our research within the group falls under one of these main areas, and I'm going to give you some examples of most of these today, but in general, we have a pretty broad set of different kinds of things we think are important, and some of them is very long-term research without any particular application area in mind, just understanding the sort of theoretical properties of machine learning models. I'll show you some examples of that. Some of it is a little bit more applied work where there's deep machine learning problems in the context of things like robotics or healthcare or other kinds of areas. So let's look at a few examples of things like that. So one interesting example is that original photo I showed you. If you think of the sequence-to-sequence model, and instead of initializing the state of the decoder with a sentence, you instead initialize it with the state of a complicated vision model that is able to actually build very powerful high-level features and understand what is in the pixels of an image. You can then decode by having training data that is an image plus a sentence about that image that humans have provided, and you have some examples of those. You can actually generate a model that is able to take a new image it's never seen before and generate sort of quite good captions for this. They're not quite as good as human captions. Like the human captions tend to have a bit more subtlety to them. So here's an example of a test image the model that was not trained on, and an example of what the human wrote about that image. As I said, it's a cute little girl asleep on the sofa cuddling a stuffed bear. And here's two sentences that the model can generate from its probability distribution over sentences. It's a close-up of a child holding a stuffed animal, or a baby is asleep next to a teddy bear. So pretty good, right? Like 5 years ago, computers were definitely not able to do anything near that level of understanding of data from just raw pixels, and now they can. Here's a few more examples. You see a human would probably give a more detailed description than a man holding a tennis racket on a tennis court. Like they might say a tennis player is about ready to serve the ball or something. So that's where it kind of lacks some of the subtlety a human would have. When it messes up, it's kind of funny. I assure you there is a man flying through the air while riding a snowboard there. If you look really closely, you just can't see the snowboard. But these models are quite powerful. Another thing we're interested in is using neural nets to take some context, some textual data, and then a question, and then be able to answer and reason about the context text that is seen. And so here you see the building was constructed in 2000 and burned in 2010, and a human has no trouble answering this question: how long did the building survive? And you're like, well, of course it's 10 years. But this is actually a pretty difficult task for machines, because you actually have to know that those are years, and then you want to subtract them. And so we give the model the ability to use different kinds of operations, and then from observing training data of the form context and question as input, and then the correct answer as output, it can learn to use these operators in the appropriate ways and pick out the little bits of the text that are important. Okay, so I'm going to continue going through more of these examples. I hope you're finding this interesting, and I hope you're getting your questions in to the live stream, and some of them are getting answered, I assume. Here we are. That one. Right. So another thing we're very interested in is, rather than training a sort of bespoke network for every particular task we we want to accomplish, we're very interested in systems where we jointly train the model to accomplish many different tasks. So here you see an example where we're actually being able to feed in French data and be able to translate the data, feed in images and be able to caption them, feed in a sentence and be able to generate a parse tree of that sentence, and be able to accomplish all this with a single model which shares a lot of its features. That seems like it's going to be very, very important for building truly flexible things, because it's not often the case that you have just one thing you care about doing. You really want a flexible system that can apply different kinds of techniques and different kinds of approaches and leverage the ability to train on different kinds of tasks and transfer that knowledge to other tasks. Another thing we're interested in is using computers for creative endeavors. This is sort of something that's traditionally been uniquely human, is the idea that you can paint interesting pictures or create new and interesting artwork or music. And we've actually we have a small group that's exploring the use of machine learning techniques to produce new and interesting artwork. And so this is a model that was developed at Google where essentially we take a neural net and you essentially can continue the back propagation you would normally do to train the model all the way into the input pixels. And so you can say, take what you're seeing and emphasize it a bit more. And so if it's seeing, oh, those clouds look a little bit like a chicken, and then you can say, well, if you're seeing a chicken, tell me what a chicken would look like there, and do something that will cause it to see more chickens. And it will kind of emphasize this. And depending on where you do this in the model, you can get very strange effects or very beautiful effects, very interesting kinds of things. We're also exploring the use of machine learning models to generate music that's pleasing to people, hopefully. It's kind of pleasing to people now, which is good. We're hoping to make it better, but that's definitely an area that we're interested in. Another area that we think is really interesting is now that computers can see, being able to combine that ability of visual and perceptual tasks with control mechanisms for robotics. And so one of the things we believe is pretty important and kind of unique for robotics is that you can have a whole bunch of robots trying different things, and they can kind of pool their experience. So unlike humans, as little babies grow up, they kind of independently learn motor skills and how the world works and that kind of thing. And in the case of robotics, we can actually collect log files and perceptual inputs and what happened when they move in a certain way, and actually learn in parallel by having lots of robots. So here's a robotics lab that we've set up in our group in collaboration with some of the robotics people in Google X to explore the use of large-scale parallelism in training robots. And so this particular task, I'll show you a short video. The robots are actually just learning to pick things up, and this is a supervised task. So if I'm trying to pick up my water, and I do that, and I fail, my gripper closes all the way, and so I get a signal that that was a failure. Whereas if I try to do that, and I pick it up, and my gripper doesn't close all the way, that's actually a success. So you can actually turn this into a supervised learning problem. And so here, let's take a look at the video. We have all these robotic arms, and you can see that they're essentially just learning to pick things up. They just try to grab something, and if they succeed, great, they get a cookie. And if they fail, they remember that, and they're like, oh, that grip didn't work very well for that kind of object. And so we actually just bought a bunch of variety packs of toys and tools on Amazon and dumped them in front of the robots. And so they just reach out and they try to grasp things. And they've grasped something like 700,000 objects. And we just released a large data set, grasping data set, much bigger than any other open data set for robotic grasping. So other people can play with that. Another important thing in our group is sort of theoretical understanding of deep networks. Why do they work? What kinds of properties cause them to be able to learn efficiently, and which kinds of properties cause them to not? We've done a fair amount of this of work in this area. This is just a quick visualization of some of the work that we've been doing, where it turns out if you look at in the vertical direction here, this is sort of the distribution of weights in the initial conditions for training a model. And if the weights are sort of very small and don't have very much variance, you get these very smooth kinds of behaviors for a variety of different initial conditions. And that actually turns out to be fairly hard to learn in. There's not enough sort of variety in the kinds of things the different units can do. And if you have very wide variance in the weights, then you get sort of much more chaotic behavior. So one of the tricks is to get kind of roughly the right amount of variance in your initial learning conditions to get things so that you explore enough in variety, but you're not sort of completely chaotic. Another thing we're sort of interested in is adversarial examples. So some people in our group looked at how could you fool a neural net. And essentially, you have a nice clean image, and an image recognition model says that's a bird. It turns out that by doing particular perturbations where you know what the weights of the trained model are, you can actually craft a very subtle perturbation of the pixel values of that image and get something where now to a human that looks like almost the same image, but the image classification model will say something completely different about that thing. It might say airplane, or it could say, garbage truck, or something that looks completely different. And in more recent work, people in our group actually demonstrated that this sort of effect can be transferred even if you take that image, you perturb it, you print it, you then take a picture of it with a cell phone camera, and then you feed it through a classifier. And that still is an adversarial example. So there's definitely something interesting going on there. And this is one of the things that we want to be able to understand better as we deploy these kinds of systems in wider and wider settings. And more generally, we're very interested in the work on how do we actually take these kinds of intelligent systems where they're essentially learning from data and then being asked to operate on data that they've never seen before. Usually they behave in predictable ways, but how can we ensure that in various ways? And so there's a number of concrete problems in AI safety as we get to deploying these systems, particularly in environments like healthcare or self-driving cars or robotics, where they're actually taking actions in the world. And it's not just, I might have mislabeled your dog photo as a cat. And this is pretty important work, we think. And one of the things we believe strongly is that AI safety is a sort of the responsibility of the entire community. So this is nice that we have a bunch of different authors on this paper from a bunch of different organizations. We think that's pretty important. Okay, so now I'd like to just switch gears a bit and tell you a bit about the Brain Residency Program. So the Residency Program is something that we started last year, and I'll tell you about the details. But we're very excited about it because it really brings in people with a wide variety of different kinds of backgrounds and new ideas for research directions into our group, and has those people work side by side with our researchers to learn how to conduct research, to take their ideas and explore them in the context of our research group. And it's been a really successful program so far. We've been running the program for about 2.5 months since the first batch of residents showed up in June this year. And we're really excited about it. And so we're going to be running the program again next year. And what it is practically is basically a 12-month role within our group with salary and benefits. So you're paid like a software engineer. It's good. And it's really an opportunity, we think, to take a career that you think you might want to have in deep learning research and get a lot of experience in applying these kinds of techniques and in learning how to conduct research. And at the end of the program, our hope is that residents will have published a couple of papers, hopefully in sort of top machine learning conferences, or posted them on archive, and hopefully be able to apply to strong graduate programs or be eligible for conversion into full-time machine learning roles at Google. And so we have a little bit of information about the first class of residents. The educational mix tends to be a mix of people with bachelor's degrees, and some have masters, and some have PhDs or postdocs. And about half are coming to us directly from school, and half have some industry experience. And one of the things I really like is that the the fields of study that are represented are not just computer science. We have about a third computer scientists, about a third people with backgrounds in mathematics or statistics, and the rest are kind of a mix of other different kinds of science backgrounds: physics, biology, health, economics. And I think that mix really adds to the diversity of research ideas in our group. So these are just a few of the examples of different kinds of resident projects that some of the residents with us now are undertaking. And you can see there's a pretty good variety. Some are in robotics, some are in genetics, some are sort of on scalability aspects, some are sort of more theoretical understanding. This is just a sample. There's probably 30 or 40 different projects. Each resident typically has one project. A few of them have two that they're working on simultaneously. In terms of the application criteria, basically we want people who have the requisite background to be successful in doing deep learning research. So basically that means you need a degree in some STEM field typically, or equivalent experience. So we encourage people with diverse or non-traditional backgrounds and experiences to apply to our program. One of the things we're seeing is that a lot of people in other sort of science fields are seeing that this kind of approach can really make a big difference in their field of science. And so they want to learn about how to use these kinds of approaches in, say, genetics or other kinds of endeavors. And we think that's really exciting and important. And then essentially some way of presenting evidence that you can program and that you've taken appropriate prerequisite courses, so calculus, probability, statistics, these kinds of things. And ideally, you demonstrate to us that you have a strong interest in the field. This might be a research project you've done at school, or some papers you've read and that kind of struck you as interesting, and maybe you write a little summary in your cover letter. Lots of different ways of doing this, but essentially something that makes us believe that you are really interested in learning how to do deep learning research. This is the timeline. This is all on the website, but essentially applications are open today and until January 13th of next year. And that's the last day to submit applications. We also ask for letters of reference. And so your letter of reference writers should get them in ideally by January 13th, but we'll accept them a little bit after that. But your application materials have to be in by the 13th. In February and March, we'll be doing some interviews for sort of the final selection of our residents. In March and April, we'll be telling people yes or no, you're in the program. And then we'll expect you to decide by roughly April whether you're going to be joining us. Last year, we had a very good acceptance rate of the offers that we made. And then in July, the program's going to begin. We're actually shifting the start date by a little bit to accommodate different kinds of college schedules. In conclusion, deep learning is really making really significant strides in a lot of fields of artificial intelligence and machine learning, speech, vision, and language understanding, and robotics and healthcare. All of these things are really making significant progress in the last few years. And our residency program is really designed to take people who want to learn about how to do research in this field and to come and join us for a year. And we're really excited about it. There's a couple of frequently asked questions. There's probably more. We will sponsor visas. We'll do our best to sort of try to get you the right visa. You just have to be eligible to work in the US if we can get you the right visa. Basically, the first couple of weeks in the program are sort of introductory and orientation kinds of lectures, but after that, it's basically a very hands-on, one-on-one or one-on-two kind of mentoring program where you work on an individual research project. Project and mentor assignments, basically there's a lot of flexibility. We have some ideas about things we think would be interesting. Residents come with their own ideas, and we kind of sort it all out. So now, I would like to introduce a couple of our residents. So let me bring them on here. So we have Jasmine and Denny. And I have a little slide that shows their background. So there are two of our residents that have just started in the last 2.5 months. So maybe Jasmine, you can tell us a little bit about how you came to be a Brain resident.
Sure, excellent. So I'm Jasmine. I just graduated college and I majored in neuroscience and computer science at the University of Pittsburgh. I chose these two things because I really would like to do work at the intersection of these two fields. And I became interested in deep learning because I was really inspired by all these recent advances that I was hearing about. Jeff talked about a lot of them in image recognition, in classification, in natural language processing. And so I wanted to get involved because I hope to, in the future, make these great strides at the intersection of deep learning and neuroscience.
Cool.
Yeah, Denny.
Okay, and Denny, you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Denny. I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley in CS and spent a year at Stanford doing research in information extraction. I worked a couple of years in the industry as an engineer. Before I joined the residency program, I was actually working in Japan and Korea for a healthcare startup. And on the side, I always did my own kind of projects in deep learning and tried to keep up with research. So I thought the residency program was a great opportunity to do this full time.
Cool. And I don't know, do you want to tell us about what your experience has been so far? Like what kinds of things have surprised you? Or
Sure, yeah. The experience has been great. I was surprised because it's a lot still like being at school, but in the best way. So I was like, oh, I'm going to work for a company. But actually, I'm still learning so much every day at this alarming rate. And so I have two main projects right now. The first, I'm looking at different RNN architectures, so LSTMs, GRUs, vanilla, and so I'm looking at the trade-offs between capacity and learnability for these different architectures at different sizes. And then my other project is, the ultimate goal is protein structure prediction using deep learning, but we're starting small, so right now we are working on secondary structure prediction from amino acid sequence.
cool. So one kind of more theoretical problem and one a little bit more applied kind of sciencey project. Cool. Denny, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm working on improving sequence-to-sequence RNNs for conversational models, so essentially trying to build really good systems that can have a natural conversation. I'm working on that with Kwok Lee, who was one of the authors of the original sequence-to-sequence paper. I think it's an exciting field because like a few years ago we had like, no idea how to build these systems, but then the last couple of years we made really rapid progress. So now there are a lot of open research problems and research challenges that lead to a lot of improvements.
Yeah. So at this point, I believe our moderators, Ping and Leslie, have selected a bunch of questions. So they're going to essentially shout them from off screen here. And we're going to do our best to answer them. And we'll sort of
Great.
divide and conquer.
Excellent. So people are very curious to know what the interview process is like. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, maybe I'll describe the weeding out process where we get down to the people we want to interview, and then maybe you guys can describe the interview process. So we get a large number of applicants. For last year, we had more than 2,000 applicants for the 27 spots we ended up taking. It's a lot of work to go through all these applications, but we sort of divided it up among all of our research people. I looked at 800 of them, and each one was read by multiple people. And essentially, we were looking for those people who have the right background and qualifications, but also that sort of interesting, background that really makes us think they would benefit a lot from being in the program. And so we narrowed that down to about 140 people that we did sort of a phone or video interview with, and then brought that down to 60 people that we brought on site. And maybe you guys can tell about the on-site process.
Oh yeah, the on-site interviews were great. We got to meet research scientists at Brain, and I believe there was 2 interviews when we were on site. One was a coding interview, a technical interview, and then the other was a research interview where we all just got an opportunity to talk with somebody on Brain about something that we were working on or had worked on in the past.
Yeah, and we also served you lunch, I think.
And there was lunch. It was quite
and
good.
wandered around
Yeah.
campus. So yeah, that's probably roughly the model we'll follow for this year.
Great. People are wondering, what is the typical educational and professional profile of a Google Brain resident? And is there an ideal profile?
Yeah, I think I kind of covered that in my talk, where actually the backgrounds are quite varied. We have a lot of people that are fresh out of a bachelor's program. We have some people who've already done a PhD or a postdoc and want to treat this more as a postdoc in our research group. And the range of fields that they've studied is also quite varied. So like Jasmine has a background in neuroscience, Denny has a computer science background. A lot of people have other kinds of math or statistics background. So there's no one profile that's right for the program. We're looking actually for that diversity of background and opinion and experience that actually sort of enriches our own research group.
Great. Can you tell us what level of research experience in machine learning and neural networks is required?
So we don't have any hard requirements. We do want people who ideally have got at least some experience, because we think they'll get up to speed and be able to be productive in doing their own research more quickly. So ideally they would be someone who maybe has done a little bit of research, or they've at least taken a machine learning class at school or on their own with some of these very popular online courses at Coursera or Udacity or something like that. Something to at least give you a little bit of background. Some people obviously have a lot more experience, but we're really looking for that diversity of different kinds of candidates. People who might be thinking about going to graduate school, people who have already finished graduate school with a lot of experience in machine learning.
One of the other very common questions is, would the projects that one undertakes during the Google Brain residency resemble more of an academic research program or a commercial R&D at Google? So I guess both apply.
Yeah.
Well, having only experienced the academic side of things, I've never been on an R&D project at Google, but this is very much similar. So I would say you're reading a lot of papers and you're catching yourself up in the area, and there's lots of open collaboration between different members on Brain and between you and your mentor, and lots of that. Very academic.
Yeah, the expectation is nearly all of the residency projects will be published on arXiv or submitted to top machine learning conferences and hopefully accepted there, and will appear as sort of normal academic style research projects. In many cases, we'll open source the code that's affiliated with the project to allow others to reproduce the results. We think it's actually really important to engage with the whole machine learning community and not sort of keep things to ourselves.
Great. So people are curious about project selection. So how did you go about exploring projects and ultimately deciding what to work on?
Yeah, I can take that. I think as a first pass, there are a lot of talks at Google you can attend by current researchers to talk about their projects. And then we had a document that has such a long list of projects that are available. You can also come up with your own projects if you want to. And you can talk to people who are working on these projects, essentially find a mentor to work with or find a group to work with. And yeah, it's pretty flexible. So whatever you're interested in, there usually is something there that somebody there who already works in this and you can work with.
Yeah, essentially, before the residence started this year, we had researchers generate a lot of interesting ideas that they thought would be worth exploring working with a resident. And so we produced 60 or 70 such ideas. And in many cases, a resident would say, hey, I'm interested in that, and they'd get paired up with the mentor. And in many cases, they'd say, that sounds interesting, but what about this little twist? And they kind of agree on a slightly different project, but at least it kind of got the discussion started. And in other cases, residents came in with very clear ideas about what they wanted to work on, and found mentors who were happy to work with them on that kind of thing. So it kind of varies.
Great. So maybe Denny and Jasmine, can you tell us what is your favorite part of the residency so far?
Yeah, I think for me is that I feel like I'm still learning so much, like every day. Coming from grad school, I feel it's like a really good environment for it. It feels like grad school, but you also see a lot of different viewpoints from like the product perspective or other perspective, how these systems are put into production. So I feel like I'm learning a lot of like new things that I didn't necessarily learn in grad school.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, I'm learning so much, and everybody around me is very smart. One of my favorite things is that, for example, a lot of the Brain residents come from different backgrounds, and so you can have somebody who has their PhD in physics, and they can give you a physics perspective of these types of concepts that we talk about every day. And yeah, you can learn a lot from everybody that's just sitting right next to you.
I think my sense is the residents have kind of bonded as a group as
yeah,
well.
and we all really like each other,
yeah.
and we hang out, and
Yeah.
it's great. And we collaborate and talk, and it's good.
Great. So I guess people are also very curious, and I know you touched on this already, how to prepare for interviews, or if there's one thing in particular you would encourage people to submit along with their application, what would that be?
I don't know.
I mean, in terms of preparation, I think it's good to get some basic knowledge of how deep learning works, maybe how TensorFlow works. Build a basic project with it, just to get your hands dirty a little bit. Yeah, that's my advice.
I agree. I think you should have maybe, if you have no formal training in machine learning or deep learning, you should at least try and go play with it, basically. Even if you haven't, as of today, you can start now and then have that ready in time for your application, just so you have something to talk about and you have something that you can show your interest with.
Right. There's a really wide variety of sort of educational materials of all kinds on the web these days. Like everything from the TensorFlow tutorials that come with the TensorFlow distribution are quite good at introducing, particular kinds of machine learning models. There's, Ian Goodfellow and Yoshua Bengio and Aaron Corval's deep learning textbook.
Textbook
is quite
great,
good.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
There's Jeff Hinton's Coursera course, which has great videos about neural nets. Andrew Ng's machine learning, more general machine learning course at Coursera. All of these things are useful. I think if you have some artifact that you can point to and say, here's something I did with machine learning. Maybe it's not like a full-fledged research project, but something you've tried and you've played with, that's going to be useful.
Great. So Jasmine, I know you're a fresh grad. You just finished earlier this year, and you're considering grad school. So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about what went into your decision between that and, I guess, just talking about how the experience now applies?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So like Leslie said, I'm planning on applying to grad school. I did apply to grad school actually the last round, so at the same time when I was applying for this program. And that was fine. I was planning to go straight into grad school, but in your applications, you have to write a personal statement. And I had kind of just discovered deep learning, and I was just introduced to machine learning. I knew I really wanted to do it, but I had nothing concrete to really talk about because I was like, I would just like to do this thing, but I have no experience in it. So this program is excellent because now when I'm writing my research statements in the future, I will have these very concrete projects that I've worked on, and now I know for sure that I do very much enjoy deep learning, and it's something that I would like to pursue in the future and continue with.
Cool.
That's it for questions.
All right, we are all out of questions. So thank you all for tuning in. This is a unique experience. We have very hot lights boiling us all, and we hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I would refer you back to the websites. So if you go there, the Brain, g.co/brain is our general team website, which shows you a lot about the research that we've been doing. G.co/brain residency has all the information about the Brain Residency Program. We'll take you to more questions that have been answered about what the program's like and how to apply. And then there's an email contact address, brain-residency@google.com, where Ping and Leslie and many others will be standing by to answer your questions. So we hope to get lots of applications, and we look forward to our next year's class of residents. We're very excited. Thank you.